So this video is going to be a little bit different from the type of stuff that we normally put out on this YouTube channel. It'll probably be a fairly basic introduction into the world of transmedia, but hopefully it'll still be interesting for you, and hopefully it'll still be able to get you thinking about your own approach to storytelling and the opportunities offered by the new technologies to kind of broaden the scope of your work and therefore your audience. So for those of you that don't know, I want to kind of start by just trying to define what the word transmedia actually means. It's also known as cross-platform or multi-platform work. And essentially what it really means is it's telling a story across multiple platforms or formats. And so what do I mean by that? Well, let me give you an example. The Matrix Reloaded was a high-profile project which really kind of embraced the transmedia approach. Alongside the film there was a computer game, Enter the Matrix, which had characters from the films like Ghost and Niobe in the game, and it also expanded the storyline of the actual film itself. And in addition to the game there was a comic book, and there was an animated series of shorts called The Animatrix, which all told stories set within the world of the film. Of course, the team behind The Matrix had a massive budget, and doing a computer game or a graphic novel may well be out of the kind of scope of what you can afford to do if you're a low-budget filmmaker. But that doesn't mean that you can't still be thinking in transmedia terms. Even just something like setting up a Twitter account in character for one of your characters can still be a very effective way of promoting or expanding your story. So when we think in terms of transmedia, the possible platforms are kind of endless. We have social media sites, live action games, computer games, widgets, mobile phones, films, web shows, TV shows, live events, merchandise, websites, DVDs, comics, and these are just some of the platforms that you can use to help tell your story. To return to the example of The Matrix Reloaded, I think what's interesting about it is the way that they were using cross-platform storytelling in two distinct ways. Firstly, they were using it to expand the story that they were telling across different platforms, and secondly, they were using those different platforms to explore the universe that they had created for the films in much more depth. So here immediately we can already see two different ways that filmmakers can use transmedia storytelling to create more opportunities. Of course, some of you might also be spotting some problems already. If you're Bryan Singer making Superman Returns, it's very easy to do a comic book prequel and expand the world of your story through transmedia elements. But if you're someone like Bela Tarr making a film like The Trojan Horse, the transmedia elements might perhaps be slightly less obvious, and perhaps your options are slightly more limited. And of course, for some people the idea of transmedia storytelling just won't interest them. A film is a film within itself, and it's a piece of art all on its own. However, as storytellers, I do think we have to acknowledge the fact that the way audiences are consuming media has changed over the last few years. The sanctity of the cinema is not what it once was. Technology and the hyperactivity of the modern age have shattered it. And once this fact is acknowledged, which when you think about it, it really has to be, the next step is really to try and understand it, and then beyond that to try and turn it to our advantage. Although it might not seem like it, that is an advantage which you really can take no matter what genre you're working in. Yes, in a way things like science fiction do lend themselves to the most obvious opportunities, but that doesn't mean that those opportunities aren't there for people in non-genre based projects. And to give you the example from Life Just Is, if you're watching this you probably realise by now that Life Just Is a contemporary piece about characters living in London a few months after they graduated. So perhaps in that respect it's not the most obvious project to take a transmedia approach. And yet when we were in development, my producers Tom and Christine and myself had several conversations about expanding it into a web series that would kind of go along with the film, and the web series would have been 5 or 6 episodes, one episode for each of the main characters in the film, and it would have kind of been a prequel looking at the lives of those characters in the run-up to where we meet them when we start the film. So for instance, we might have had one episode where we see the characters of Jay and Bobby who are in a relationship in the film, and we find out how they met and how they got together prior to the film beginning. So in a sense, what that web series would have done would have been to offer a further emotional and psychological insight into those characters by providing a little bit more of their backstory. And in addition to discussing the idea as a web series, we also considered doing it in a comic form. And although ultimately those prequels didn't come to fruition, I was excited by the possibilities that they offered. As the writer-director of a film which is really quite intensely focused on its characters, the idea of exploring those characters in even greater detail was something that excited me creatively. So the reason why we never took those ideas for the prequels beyond the development stage was simply down to lack of enough money to make it happen, and that is something that if you're thinking about a transmedia project, you are going to have to consider what is the extra cost involved, not only in terms of finance, but also in terms of time. However, while it's true that transmedia projects may require a bigger initial outlay, it's also true that they do offer greater possibilities for revenue return. Simply put, by creating multiple works on multiple platforms, you have more products that you can monetize, and I think that is a key point to remember. As much as the different elements may be there to point towards a certain thing, there are also products within themselves that you should be able to monetize. I recently heard a story about a company that created an alternative reality game to go along with their film, but the film flopped and the ARG was a great success, only because they hadn't monetized the ARG, it didn't really translate into any profit for them. Another important consideration when you're conceiving transmedia work is to think about how your audience are going to travel between platforms, and you need to think about that both in terms of physicality and in terms of psychology. How are they going to move, say, for instance, from the cinema to the internet, and more importantly, what is it that's going to make them want to do that? So here perhaps my earlier point about genre comes back in. Mystery aspects are a good way to hook in an audience and to get them to want to make that transition. So is mythology. If you think about the buzz that surrounded the Blair Witch Project when it came out, and in a sense that was another film that utilised transmedia elements. They also had comic books, and they had The Curse of the Blair Witch, which was a TV documentary which filled in some of the backstory and the mythology that was there that they created for that film. And I think that what's key about that is that it expanded the world that those filmmakers created with the film. And if you want your viewers to actively engage in all the different transmedia content that you're putting out, you need to enhance the story that you're telling. It can't just be about promoting a central film. You should genuinely kind of enrich the world and the characters that you've created. Because ultimately, if you're creating a world and characters that people want to find out more about, that they want to kind of get to know better, then that is ultimately going to be the best way to get them motivated to travel across different platforms and to seek out the further branches that you're creating for your project. It's also worth noting that if you're successful in doing this, you might actually be able to pull people across different mediums that they wouldn't normally explore. So for instance, if you make a really great comic book, a comic book fan may be so taken with the world or the characters that you've created that they then go out and buy a computer game that also explores those characters in that world in greater detail, and they might be someone that doesn't normally play computer games, but they've been so enthused by what they've seen in the comic branch of your work that they've gone over to grab the computer game branch. So you really need to think about how the different branches can help and support each other. And of course, by doing this, you're also maximising your audience outreach, because you have platforms that people are passionate about, like comics, like computer games, and so you're appealing to them in the medium of their choice, basically. Of course, another point to remember is that not all audience members will engage with the product in the same way. Transmedia expert Christy Diener, for instance, has identified 3 different levels of viewers, or as she puts it, users. You have creative, active and enthusiastic. Our story architect Lance Wheeler has spoken about players, watchers and agents. So again, you need to think about the way in which people are going to be engaging with your work. For me, The Matrix Reloaded, again, is a good example here, because where that film didn't do so well for me was they put half the storyline in the game and half of it in the film, and so for the casual viewers, those that just want to watch the film and don't want to support all the different platforms, they were literally only getting half the story, and so if you're only telling half your story in the film itself doesn't quite stand up as a piece by itself. So you need to make sure that your project isn't going to be alienating to people that do only want to explore your one core product, but you also need to make it interesting enough that it is going to engage the enthusiastic user, the one that does want to explore all of your different parts. No one said that transmedia stuff was easy. One aspect of the transmedia user experience that shouldn't be overlooked is the desire for interactivity. Indeed, this goes back to the point I made earlier about trying to understand the ways in which audience members are now consuming media. Sitting back and watching in a passive manner is often no longer enough for a lot of people. In his keynote speech at the Power to Pixel conference in 2009, producer Ted Hope said something that I thought was very interesting, which was that we have to go away from the idea of giving the audience a monologue and try and create a dialogue with them. And perhaps that's where Wheeler's third category, that of agent, comes in. For him, an agent is an audience member with the desire to contribute something back to the project. The audience, he believes, should be seen as collaborators, while Hope has spoken about how we need to see ourselves as enablers and not creators. So we need to look at ways in which the crowd can contribute back to our work and not be afraid to let them co-create on the same level as us. So why not allow them to become the co-creator of our projects, and therefore also the promoter if they're passionate about it. If they're working on it, they're more likely to tell their friends and family to support it and go and see it. So there are many different ways that you can encourage this type of audience participation, from remix competitions to fan fiction to crowdsourcing ideas. And for those of you that don't know, crowdsourcing means basically asking your followers to contribute ideas or designs or storylines or whatever to your project, usually done through an online community of some kind. And there are websites out there that will support that idea that you can log on to tap into those communities. Of course, co-creation is just one possible form of interaction, and things like games or comments boards also invite audience involvement. And whatever approach you take to audience involvement, it's really by turning the viewer into an active participant that you will ensure the highest level of audience engagement. So that's really what you want to be aiming for. So to kind of sum up and everything I've said, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that the new technologies have really opened up new ways for products to be consumed, and it therefore calls for new forms of interaction, thereby allowing for increased revenue potential because of the different mediums, increased audience engagement perhaps, and increased creative output if you really take advantage of all the different mediums that are out there for you to explore with your project. So in other words, I think it's basically a very exciting time for you to be a creative, for you to be doing this stuff. I think the possibilities now are perhaps greater than they've ever been. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll be back soon with a more regular update about the film's post-production process. Thank you.